Enlightenment. That period is known as Enlightenment. The age of Newton. Hopefully you guys know Newton. What's Newton is famous for? Newton wasn't a philosopher, right? He is actually a physicist. So what did he discover? There is a famous story about gravity, yeah. About an apple which apparently hit him on the head. So that is an age of Newton. But he influenced philosophy because it was so big, his work in mathematics and physics, that of course it affected philosophy too. In 1687, his Principia Mathematica was published, and that is considered the beginning of the Enlightenment. But the opening act of Enlightenment itself is John Locke's essay concerning human understanding, about which we will talk today. He published it in 1690, the end of 17th century, and then we consider the end of Enlightenment, because unfortunately it ended with Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, 1781. We will talk about it after the spring break, actually the second week after the spring break. What is enlightenment? Enlightenment is man's living his self-caused immaturity. Man becomes mature, man becomes an adult, so to say. So that is what is influencing philosophy in this period of time. Newton's science had a huge impact, like I said, enormous influence. Newton himself was born in 1642. That's the year Galileo died. So Galileo kind of passed on the torch. Newton was rather modest about it himself, and he famously said, "If I have seen farther than other scientists, it is because I have stood upon the shoulders of giants." Who were the giants? Galileo, Copernicus, all these other people who contributed. Nobody works in vacuum, right? When you are born, you don't know anything yourself, but then you learn things which other people did, and hopefully you yourself can contribute to. Very few people can, actually. Some people contribute a little bit, most people don't contribute to that at all, but then there are people who contribute a lot, and Newton is one of them. This is people who are really revolutionaries in a sense. They push us forward quite a bit. So Newton was this kind of a person, and then philosophy at the time also was influenced, so philosophers started philosophizing in a Newtonian style, basically copying his method. The operations of human mind, ethics, and politics thought of as collection of phenomena that could be explained in terms of laws, because that's what he himself did, right? The law of gravity is the law, so he was using mathematics to describe this law, and he thought everything follows this law, so that kind of provided an explanation of what's happening when you drop something. Aristotle, if you remember, thought that everything has its natural place, and so that's why objects go down when you drop them. Because stone's natural place is earth, so if you drop a stone, it goes towards its natural place. But air has natural place up in the air, that's why air goes up. And flames goes up, because flames belong to the higher spheres. But Newton actually described it as a law of gravity. He calculated this law, but he also didn't know what exactly it was. In fact, even today we kind of not completely sure. I don't know if you guys heard about the way Einstein explained gravity. What do they think gravity is today? Do you know? It's kind of interesting part of physics. So gravity basically is the object curves the space. That's not Newton. Newton himself just said, I don't know, Einstein. So imagine space like a line, right? If you put an object, this is what happens. The bigger the object, the more it curves the space. Smaller object then kind of falls into this curve. That's what happens, that's why smaller objects are attracted to big objects. But that's already 20th century, much later than Newton. In fact, Einstein kind of overrides Newton. Many of the things Newton thought were simple, Einstein told us are not. But that is already modern day in physics. At the time, they were so fascinated as Newton, they actually thought that this is rather the simple, straightforward laws for everything. And the ideas are like mental particles too. They thought the ideas also follow laws just like mental particles. One problem it created, remember the relations between religion and science were always not easy, faith and reason relation. At this point they became very tense. Why? Because it seemed like everything which before was explained by God, more and more was explained by science. If the entire universe follows these laws of physics, what is the role of God? What does God do? Does God do anything at all? Even people who believed in God started thinking more and more that perhaps God is just created the world, and it's like clockwork mechanism, right? Like the clock. You wind it up and you leave it, and then it keeps on going. So that's the idea which started to emerge. God created the world and left it alone, and now the world is just running on those laws which God has set up. Newton himself was actually a deeply Christian person. He never thought that there is no God. He would not allow this possibility. He tried to actually insert God into the system a little bit. He was observing certain things he had no explanation for, so he used God to explain it. For example, he could not understand why the gravitational attraction of the stars does not cause them to collapse. Why don't all stars just like collapse into each other? And he thought, okay, well, since I don't know, maybe that's God. The God is like keeping them apart. Now that is known as God of the gaps. God of the gaps meaning you have a gap in your knowledge and you stick God in there to fill the gap. But there is a danger with that. And the danger is what? Later on, science may actually answer this question, and then that would look like, wherever you are putting God, there's actually no God there. So more and more people would actually become atheists. And this is exactly what was happening, because effectively, what he thought had no explanation turned out it has explanation, and more things throughout the centuries were explained. So God of the gaps is just this attempt to explain, to use gaps within scientific knowledge as evidence for the necessity of God. So this is the stages of historical emergence of a disbelief. Initially, most scientists and philosophers, including Newton, saw religion and science as co-equal partners. You can believe in God, go to church, and at the same time do science. No problem. Gradually, viewpoint emerged that the claims of revealed religion should be accepted, but only after they have been trimmed down to conform to scientific outlook. So if religion tells you something, but the science tells you it's not, then you may want to adjust your religious beliefs, because science does seem to override it. Right? Because in many cases, if you rely on science, you get better results than if you rely on whatever Bible tells you or something. So that started to happen more and more. John Locke is one of the examples. As science gained greater authority, the position of deism emerged. Deism is actually the position that, like I said, God just started things, wind up the clockwork, and he is no longer involved at all. That's deism. That way you keep God. You can still believe in God. But it no longer interferes with science, because science just describes all these laws, the universe works the way God put it together. However, then there are no miracles, because how can you have a miracle? The miracle would interfere with this. Then agnosticism started to emerge. Hume will be among the first agnostics. What is agnosticism? That is basically the position that maybe there's God, maybe there's no God, we just don't know. So it's not the same as atheism, because you're not saying that there is no God, you're just saying we don't know and we can't know. And following that, full-blown atheism appeared. Atheism, well, actually, atheism is not necessarily the position that there is no God. Very few people positively will tell you, I am absolutely 100% sure that there is no God. But it is more of a position that, like, it doesn't seem likely that there is God. It seems like, based on the evidence, there probably is no God. So that's more or less full-blown atheism, because I don't know if there's any person in the world who honestly, from their heart, can like say 100%, no doubt about it, I'm absolutely sure there's no God. And if somebody tells that, they probably lying a little bit, because I mean there's really not enough evidence for that, right? You cannot be completely sure. So at the very best you can say, based on all the evidence, I think most likely there's no God. Now John Locke. John Locke is a very interesting figure because he had a lot of influence on politics, and in particular on politics of this country. The founding fathers read him and were huge fans of John Locke. His two treatises of government is very well known. If you take political science, you'll probably read them and study them. It is more political philosophy. We're not going to go into this work too much, although we will mention it in the end. For our purposes, it's more interesting what he did in his other work. Who was he? He was born in England, 1632, attended the University of Oxford. And remember, University of Oxford, all those universities at the time still taught Aristotle. The whole study was in Latin. They did the scholastic thing, which is squaring Bible with Aristotle. Very boring. People at the time, young people already found it to be unbearable. They were reading people like Descartes. They thought that was a lot more interesting, including John Locke. He read Descartes. He knew Descartes' work very well. Then remember there was civil war. So he was born 1632. He was a teenager when the king was beheaded. And then he was on the side of Parliament. He himself supported the Parliament, but the Parliament actually, Oliver Cromwell resigned. Oliver Cromwell was the person at the head of the Parliament, and they restored monarchy for a while. When they restored monarchy, John Locke ran away to Holland because he was afraid that a monarch who came back into position of power will not be happy with him for supporting the Parliament so much. He lived for a few years in Holland, and then Glorious Revolution happened. I don't know if you guys heard about Glorious Revolution. So basically, they were so unhappy with their king again that they decided to get rid of him too. And his daughter Mary lived in Holland. She was married to William of Orange. They came from Holland with an army and were declared new king and queen. William and Mary. And the king, who was at the time, I think Charles II, if I'm not mistaken, had to run away and spend the rest of his life in France in exile. Why? Part of the reason he was Catholic, he was trying to bring back this Catholic Church, and remember they were already Anglicans after the Henry VIII, and also the Parliament was not happy with him. People already got a lot of power. So after this Glorious Revolution, when William and Mary came back, the King of England or the Queen of England never had as much power anymore. They limited them so much that they became more or less symbolic figure, which is what it is today, right? There is King Charles. Can he do anything? Not really. The only person who decides everything in England today is the Prime Minister. Starmer right now. Prime Minister has all the power. The king literally has no power. Technically, he still has the power to dissolve Parliament, but he never uses it unless the Prime Minister asks him to. So the way it works, Prime Minister goes to the king, and would tell him, I think we should dissolve parliament. And then the king, okay, let's dissolve. That's how it works. So the king himself does not rule. He has this symbolic role. He goes around the world, shakes hands, has speeches, and that's pretty much all they do, the entire royal family. And that started after this glorious revolution. Glorious revolution really limited the king. The parliament became real power. Prime minister became the real head of state. The king just was there as a symbol. So they kept the king, but only so much. And finally, John Locke died in 1704. So, essay concerning human understanding. Remember, it was published 1690, so 14 years before his death, when he came back from Holland, and under William and Mary, he actually got some positions in government, because at that point they already liked the fact that he supported Parliament rather than the king. After they got rid of the yet another king, first one was beheaded, this one was in exile, so now it was actually popular. Interesting book. It's a little bit, it's not as exciting as Spinoza, right? It's a little hard to read, but it is very influential. So we saw, remember that there's these two groups we divided all the philosophers, rationalists and empiricists. We saw rationalists. Now he is the first empiricist. What does that mean? He actually did not believe there's any preconceived ideas in our head when we are born. He thought we are born as a clean slate. There's literally nothing there. An essay concerning human understanding is the work he himself at the beginning explains, started from his conversation with friends. They were talking about some religious subjects, and then they realized that in order to talk about them, you have to start by understanding what can we know? Can we really know certain things? And where does knowledge come from? So he decided to write the whole book on a subject and to determine what can we know, what can we not know, where does it all come from. And he thought it will also help people like Newton, because they work on science, so it's for them also is important to understand what can be known, what cannot be known. So here is the quote from beginning of the book. He says, he decided to be employed as an under-laborer in cleaning the ground a little, removing some of the rubbish that lies in the way of knowledge. So rubbish is there. It prevents people like Newton from doing their work, and the philosopher comes to remove this rubbish so that we could have a clear passage. First, he asks, where did our ideas come from? Because he spends a good chunk of the book proving the point that they are not preconceived, they are not there when we are born. Where do they come from? Now, first of all, the definition of what idea is at the time was a little bit different than now. Here's what he says. The idea is the immediate object of perception, thought, or understanding. That's what he means by the idea. The immediate object of perception, thought, or understanding, and he gives these examples of what he calls simple ideas. Whiteness, hardness, sweetness, thinking, motion, man, elephant, army, drunkenness, and others. It's actually both simple and complex. This is the ideas. Since Newton was such an authority and they used Newtonian kind of approach, one way to understand it is like this. Our mind is like an empty box. When we're born, it's empty. And the ideas are like little bricks which enter. So they all come from the outside, right? And then we have them in our head. So it's kind of this very mechanistic approach. So what happens with them when they're already there? He calls his method historical plane method. So he uses historical plane method to figure it out, tries to trace back where all these ideas come from. So like whiteness, for example, let's say whiteness. Where does the idea of whiteness come from? Well, when you're born, you see something white. And that's the idea of whiteness which enters your head. You don't have a word for it yet. Later on somebody will tell you this is whiteness. Then you will have a word. Like I said, he criticizes the inner ideas a lot. That's the first chapter of the book. He says, no proposition can be said to be in the mind which it never yet knew, which it was never yet conscious of. So like the idea of God. Where do you get the idea of God? Well, it also enters your mind from outside, right? You learn about it at some point. It's not there yet as Descartes. Descartes thought that we're already born with it, like it's stamped on our mind. And he actually tries to prove it. He says, I mean, look at all these examples. First of all, one of the arguments that there are inborn ideas is we all agree. We all agree about certain things. But he says, well, even if it's true that we all agree, and it's not exactly true, we don't agree about everything, but even if it was true, does it prove that it's already there? It simply could be the fact that we all have similar experiences, like we all experience whiteness, right? We all see it the same way, so that's where we get the idea of whiteness and so on. And second, he says, well, there's actually examples of people who don't understand even simple principle like contradiction. Children would be one of them. Children don't understand these principles yet. Mentally deficient people don't understand them yet. People in pre-scientific cultures also may not know it. So that's not something universal. There's literally no idea which is completely universal. Everybody agrees about it. And well, the simple ideas, like I said, this is simple idea. Simple ideas enter the mind as tiny little bricks or atoms. The spatial metaphor. It's like a space. The brain is a space, and they come from outside into this space. Particles in motion leave traces in the mind in the form of ideas, and the most fundamental are simple ideas which are like atoms of thought. Remember, atoms also, they used it in physics. That's, at the time they thought tiny little bricks of reality which cannot be divided. Greek idea. Later on we discovered they can be divided, but at the time they thought they cannot be divided. Where do they come from? Well, sensation would be one. So whiteness would be an example of sensation. But he says there is also reflection. Reflection is like operation of our own mind to create certain ideas. Like you can think of it as knowledge from introspection. When you think about what's happening in your head, thinking, doubting, perception, believing, reasoning, that is not something you just see outside. You can feel it inside, happening inside your brain, right? My brain is thinking. So that would be kind of reflection rather than sensation. So this is the two sources of simple ideas. Sensation, which is our experience of the outside world, and reflection, which is our experience of our own brain working. And he challenges us to find any idea which is not originating from these two. He says, let anyone examine his own thoughts and thoroughly search into his understanding. And let him tell me whether all the original ideas he has there are any other than the objects of his senses or of the operations of his mind. And how great a mass of knowledge soever he imagines to be lodged there, he will, upon taking a strict view, see that he has not any idea in his mind, but what one of these two have imprinted. Okay, and then there are complex ideas. Complex ideas are just combination. Our mind can connect some of the simple ideas, and that would be a complex idea. Examples, ideas of beauty, gratitude, a man, an army, a universe. So beauty, for example, right? It's not like you see one thing and you go, okay, that's beauty. But you've seen one thing, you've seen the other thing, you've seen the third thing, and you kind of combine the qualities they all have, and you say, they were all beautiful. So that's what beauty is. All those things can give me this idea. Gratitude, same thing. Like one person did something and you thought it was nice, the other, the third one, and then you're like, okay, all those nice things they did, let's call it gratitude. It's like that's what I think it is. So that it would be a combination of these simple ideas. And then he thinks our mind can, when it works on them, can do three different things: compounding, relating, and abstracting. You will see how Berkeley is much more interesting. Berkeley did read Locke and will answer to that. So that's why we also care about it. And it is quite influential. So three ways. Compounding. So for example, you can put together sweet, red, and round, and you have an apple. Right? Sweetness is one simple idea. Roundness is another simple idea. And finally, redness is a third simple idea. But the apple is a combination of all three. You can also relate things. That's a slightly different thing. You say, this is taller than this. Or this is heavier than this. So that's another thing our mind does. And then abstracting. What exactly is abstracting? This is how we get abstract or general ideas. For example, what is a book? You see one book which may look like this. You see another book which may be completely different size, different color. You see a third book, you see a fourth book, and then you have this abstract idea of a book, which is neither big nor small, neither red nor blue, but you kind of have an idea of that, right? So that would be abstracting. Like I said, Berkeley will come back to it. Berkeley will have some interesting criticism about abstraction. So abstract ideas are just the complex ideas, and they combine all these qualities. We can even have the idea of infinity in this way. What is infinity? Well, the power we observe in ourselves, we're repeating without end our own ideas. So what would it be for something to be infinitely large? Well, you can imagine something large, right? You can imagine something larger. Keep on going, and then you will imagine something infinite. That's the idea. And then they were divided in primary and secondary quality. He's not the first one, but that's an important division. Actually, Galileo had it too, Descartes had it too. Let's think about it. So this is what they thought is happening. Some qualities we observe are primary. They belong to the object itself. That would be solidity, extension, shape, motion, rest, and number. Right? So if you see something which is a cube, that would actually be primary quality of this object. It is a cube. But colors, sounds, taste, odors, warmth, and coldness are not primary qualities, they're secondary qualities. So the fact that this cube, for example, is red would be a secondary quality. Why? Why do you think they thought it was secondary? No, because people can disagree about that. Like two people not going to disagree that it is a cube. But about colors, about taste, odors, people can disagree very easily. And it's not easy to determine. Also, they thought that mathematics, you can only use mathematics for the shapes, right? Like the cube, they already knew that geometry describes the cube. The circle has a formula. But they didn't think that you can use numbers for colors, sounds, taste, odors, warmness, or coldness. Now, how about today? Can we use numbers for colors and sounds?
Yes.
Yes, because that's how it works in computers. Computer, when you see the picture, even same thing on your phone is like a little computer, right? What exactly is the picture? It's called digital picture. What does that mean? It's actually just a very long string of zeros and ones. That's all there is. If you actually look at it, this would look like something like this. It's just that they are compressed so much that it becomes, in your eye, it becomes a color. Same thing with the sounds. What does it mean, digital music? The entire music is the zeros and ones, but because it streams very quickly and there's a very large number of them, each one of them represents disturbance of the air, and then you hear music. So actually it turned out that this is also all digital. They just at the time, they didn't know how to represent it with numbers. Today we do. And that's exactly what computers work on. The computer is just doing operations with zeros and ones very quickly. But back then they thought, no, color cannot be described by numbers, sound cannot be described by numbers, and we can disagree about them, so it's a secondary quality. But shape, size, you can measure it, numbers can describe them, so it's primary quality. Now, what knowledge can all of this stuff produce? According to Locke, knowledge, first of all, is the perception of the connection and agreement, disagreement, and repugnancy of any ideas. Right? So you work with these ideas. If they connect correctly, then you have no problem. But if they don't, then you will see that there is a problem, and that means we don't have knowledge of it. All the true propositions are properly related ideas. They're ones which don't interfere with each other. And we can also get 3 degrees of knowledge, he thought. First of all, intuitive knowledge, that's like something you immediately know. Like 3 is 1 plus 2. If you see 1 plus 2, you immediately know it's 3. You don't need to do some sort of long thinking of that. Right? So that would be an example of intuitive knowledge. But then there is demonstrative knowledge. What is demonstrative knowledge? Well, if you have a very long mathematical formula, you're not going to immediately know it. You have to go step by step, and once you go step by step, you will prove the result. So that requires kind of a longer demonstration. You would have to do it in steps, and it will take time. And then there's sensitive knowledge, which we get from experience around us. Like, how do I know that there's a table in this room? Well, it's not exactly intuitive, but I can see it, right? If I touch it, I can feel it. If I knock on it, I can hear it, and that's how I know it's there. But he also makes a note that this type of knowledge is not as certain, because 1 plus 2 equals 3 is very certain. Whether there's a table or not, I can only be so sure. There is a possibility that I'm wrong about it. So it's all kind of seems like common sense, because this is the foundation of the way we think about it today. But there are problems with it too, as we will see. So primary ways of knowing, true knowledge would make everything as certain as geometry. Unfortunately, there are very few things can be truly known. And this is when, in Philosophy 102, when we talked about deduction and induction. Right? If you took 102, deduction and induction, that's deduction based on those certain rules. 1 plus 2 equals 3. But induction, we cannot be as certain about it, even whether or not they're stable in this room. It's not as certain as this. I could be having hallucinations, I could be mistaken, maybe my eyes are giving me a wrong impression of what is here, and so on. Nonetheless, it is reasonably reliable. In most cases, if we use our senses, the result can be worked. Like if I think I see a table here, I can more or less confidently say that I will put the bottle and it will stand there, right? And it does. So, works reasonably well, for the most part. This is called representative realism. So, what is representative realism? First of all, it's realism. It says there's really a table here. There's really a number of students here. There's really board. But Locke would say, I don't have direct access to that. That's why it's representative. The only thing I have direct access to is my ideas. But where are my ideas? In my mind. So that's what representative realism is. Representative realism says I only have access to ideas in my mind, right? So this is my mind. Ideas are here, and I have direct access of that. I have an idea in my mind that there is a table in front of me. I have an idea in my mind that there are students in front of me. I have an idea in my mind that there is a bottle on this table which contains water. But it's all in my mind. Now, at the same time, I'm reasonably sure that it does represent reality as it really is outside my mind. But, can I be sure? Can I claim knowledge, and can Locke in this case claim knowledge that there really are objects outside of our mind? If knowledge, as he says, is a perception of agreement or disagreement of ideas in my mind, and the mind perceives nothing but ideas, can I be sure there really are tables and chairs and students and bottles? If you've been honest, can you be sure about that?
I don't think so, right? Because you could use the reasoning of other people and what they perceive.
But what if there's no other people? Did you see The Matrix?
Yeah, but that's a film.
Well, film actually based on this idea. Let's just think about it together. Like, let's imagine Matrix is true. We all right now are swimming in liquid on Mars. We are on Mars, right? There are wires attached to our heads. And some agents are feeding us the picture of this room and the rest of the world. This is all simulated. It's just because you can do it, right? You can imagine it. Can you imagine it? If somebody attaches wires to your brain, we actually have technology similar to this today. These wires can feed the sounds, the picture. Have you heard like they actually gave a deaf person a thing which he attaches to his brain and he can hear sounds? His ears don't work. That's just like a small part of it. We're not as developed yet. But theoretically you can do the same thing for the eye nerves, right? So you can stimulate the eye nerves so it would be sending a picture right into your brain of something which doesn't exist. So what if we were really all on Mars and all this reality, what we think is reality, is simulated? We would feel everything, right? Because what is the sensation I have when I grab a table? The nerves, right? The nerves go into my brain and send this sensation. But again, you can simulate it. So if they actually attach something to your brain and simulate it in this way, it is entirely possible that the entire world is fake. Think about it, when you die, you may actually find out. There's another movie, Total Recall. You watched that one. Also kind of a similar idea. Did anybody watch it? With Schwarzenegger. It's kind of old, but so basically the idea there was they had this type of thing which was commercially available, right? You pay a certain amount of money and it's kind of like a movie. They attach something to your brain and then you can be whoever you want, because it's kind of like you go to sleep, type of sleep, but your brain is simulated so you are in this different place. You can go on Mars and be a superhero, like very strong, like a game, right? So you decide ahead of time what the rules are going to be, but then when you are there, you won't even remember what you are there. And this is what was happening with Schwarzenegger. I'm not going to tell you the entire movie, but part of the plot there is that at some point you may be confused whether you actually are there or whether this is already real. Like somebody can come to you and say, hey, this is not real, you're still there. So don't take it too seriously. And then you'd be like, you telling me the truth? Right? Am I still there or is this already real? Because this guy is about to kill me. I don't want to take any chances here if he is real. So that is the idea. Can you be completely sure this is not what is happening? The honest answer is no. How can you be sure? The only way you can be truly sure is if you somehow go outside your brain and look at it from the side and see yourself like through some other brain. But you can't. Yeah, there are other people. But if these people are not real, if this is just the phantoms which these evil agents create in your head, of course they'll be telling you, yeah, it's all real, but they'll be fake themselves and the whole thing will be fake. So that's the problem. When we get to Berkeley, you will see that Berkeley actually will spot this problem and address it right away. But Locke didn't see the problem here. Locke actually thought it makes perfect sense. Why would I doubt that there are tables and chairs and poles and so on? He thought it was not a problem. Right? And so his metaphysics is kind of based on that. What is a substance? Well, this is closer to our understanding of substance. He says, if I touch stuff, there is some sort of resistance there. There got to be some stuff there. That's the substance. Right? So, can I be sure? Well, not completely, but reasonably sure. So he said substance is actually something he knew not what, and it's the supposed but unknown support of those qualities we find existence. So there seems to be some stuff out of which everything is made, and he said, I don't know what it is, but I'm pretty sure it's there. Because when I touch stuff, I know there's something there. That's what he thought substance is. And then what about spiritual substance? Because remember, Descartes thought there are two different types of substances. He actually said that, yeah, there seems to be a spiritual substance too. It is just as clear and well-founded as the idea of physical substance. Just like when I touch things, I feel there is some resistance. Similarly, it seems like there is a mind. Seems like there is some sort of spiritual content. Thus, we have as many and as clear ideas belonging to spirit as we have belonging to body, the substance of each being equally unknown to us. So, the conclusion then is that, both ideas are as clear as the other, but they actually are not clear at all. So, on one hand, it seems like there is something. On the other hand, we're not sure what it is. That is what he thought about the substance. And how about the idea of God? Well, he actually uses completely opposite approach of Descartes. Remember how Descartes started with the idea of God? Where did he find the idea of God? In his mind. He said, I have the idea in my mind. Now, Locke, remember, is empiricist. His mind doesn't have an idea. It's empty when you're born. But he thinks that if I look outside of me and I find these ideas of goodness, duration, existence, I can actually enlarge them. Like, for example, I know that cats and dogs live like 10, 15, 20 years. I know human being lives like 80 years. So I can imagine a being which lives eternally. It's just many times more than this. I know that I have some knowledge. Other people may have less knowledge than me, yet other people may have more knowledge than me. So I can imagine a being which has all the knowledge. So that's his approach to how you can understand God. You enlarge all these qualities and you come up with a being which is perfectly knowledgeable, perfectly good, and perfectly infinite. Well, he was quite influential to deism. Remember again, deism is this idea that God already created the world but does not interfere with it anymore. Locke's work has influenced it quite a bit. although Locke himself leaned more towards traditional Christianity, he even uses this example of God as something which exists. Nonetheless, he helped the idea of deism, laid out the groundwork for it. Deism starts around this time and becomes more and more prominent. And finally, a few words about his political theory, because, like I said, he was very influential for our founding fathers. Classical liberalism. If you ever hear about classical liberalism, that's Locke. What is classical liberalism? It is somewhat different from what we call liberalism today. Liberalism today is more of a left liberalism, right? But classical one is quite a bit more conservative, I would say. Because that's the idea that we need the government, but the government should be very restricted, should not interfere with our lives, and it's only there to make our lives better. Why? Because at the time, individualism was very, very popular. In fact, Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe was written at this time. Did you guys read Robinson Crusoe? Anybody? No? Okay. Did you watch the Castaway with Tom Hanks? Nobody even watched Castaway? Okay, you probably should try. The idea is very simple. A single person ends up after some kind of disaster on an island, all by himself. And then, what happens? Well, he starts building his life, right? So in Robinson Crusoe, he swam back to the ship. He brought some stuff like a knife, some other stuff. In case of Tom Hanks' Castaway, that was an airplane crash, so he pulled some stuff from the airplane. But everybody else is dead. So it's only him and just some basic stuff. And he started building a shelter, because you need to live somewhere. Then he started planting all sorts of vegetables and fruit and whatever he could not find. In fact, in Robinson Crusoe, one thing he really missed, he was a smoker. So he was missing tobacco. He could find all sorts of other stuff, but for a long time he could not have cigarettes. And finally, he was able, I don't remember how, to find this tobacco seed, which he planted and grew himself a tobacco and then made himself a pipe or something and was so happy about it. Anyway, but what is the idea here? This one person, right, without the society, capable of existing all on its own. That's individualism, right? Like one person is already the entire world. Do you need other people? Not so much, but I mean, you are stuck with them, so you may as well live with them somehow, because we can't all have our own individual life. Nonetheless, classical liberalism is the idea that the other people are, well, not very helpful in that sense. However, we need, since we are stuck with them, we need some rules, and that's where the government kind of comes in. We set up this rule so that other people at least did not disturb you too much, because they can. He was not as extreme as Hobbes. Remember, for Hobbes, actually other people are so dangerous. If there's no laws, they can kill you right away. And this law, life in a natural prehistoric society was this brutal slaughter of everybody by everybody. Well, Locke is not as pessimistic as this. But he thinks then, nonetheless, we should have the kind of a contract with each other about the rules, how we're going to live, because even though we can all live in this natural society without the rules, but it's a little bit better if we have rules. So that's the idea of social contract, right? We kind of all form a government by basically agreeing to obey certain laws. I'm not going to steal from you, you're not going to steal from me. I'm not going to kill you, you're not going to kill me, and so on. And for that, like the government is there just to help us out. Because even though we can do it without government, but it's better with government. First of all, written and agreed upon laws needed to resolve controversies among individuals. If you don't have a written law, different people may disagree about something. That's why it's nice to write it down. So then, if we disagree, we can go and read it, right? It's like, okay, what does it say here? officially appointed and different judge could apply the laws in a more equitable way. Right? So you have officially appointed, hopefully, completely impartial judge. Not your cousin, not my cousin, not your friend, not my friend, just some random dude who hopefully is nice and fair. So then if I have disagreement with you, I think I'm right, you think you're right, my family thinks I'm right, your family thinks you're right, my friends think I'm right, your friends think I'm right. Who's going to solve it? The judge. The judge will be the deciding factor. And it does work better for the most part, right? Even though, as we now find out, it also depends who appoints this judge. But at least for the most part, the judges are trying to be impartial, they are not involved personally. And then we need the government to enforce the laws. Because, I mean, let's say the judge decided something, but I or you will say, to hell with the judge. Then what happens? Well, you need the police, you need some law enforcement who then will arrest you and force you to do whatever the judge said you should do. That's the idea. That's the justification of the government. People unite together for mutual benefit, transfer some of their individual power to the political body. There is initial contract in the form of a government. This government kind of then helps us out to live a little bit better. So that's classical liberalism. The power of the government may not extend beyond what is required for the common good. So the government shouldn't tell you to do things which you disagree with too much. It just should organize this for everybody. For Hobbes, the government was necessary because without government we will all kill each other. But for Locke it's not like that. For Locke we can still perfectly well coexist, it's a little better with the government. And he suggested separation of power. This idea of separation of power comes back to Locke. Except Locke actually thought slightly differently. He thought there were supposed to be three branches, but the three branches would be executive, legislative, and federative. Not judicial, federative. It was Montesquieu, the French guy, who lived after Locke, and he is the one who suggested to have judicial as the third one. So this is what we have now, right? Why do we have it now? The founding fathers read both Locke and Montesquieu, and they were the ones who decided that's a good idea. How about we set up the Constitution so these three branches of power would be separated, right? So which is starting to crumble now. But at least the idea is they should be separated. The president shouldn't, the executive branch should not have all the power. There's certain powers which the courts have, and there are certain powers the Congress has. And they should all obey the rules. And finally, labor theory of property. That's another influential thing. It would be very influential for Marx. This is how he looked at property. What is property? The natural resources, air, water, soil, trees, belong to everybody. Where does private property begin? Once you put your labor into it, right? So the tree by itself doesn't belong to anybody. It's not my tree, it's not your tree. But if I cut down this tree and make a table, that is my table. You can't take it from me anymore. Now, I can sell it to you or exchange for something which you made, but that's the only way. You can't just take it from me. That is my property. Similarly for you, like let's say you killed a cow, made some leather out of it, and made shoes out of it. Now it's your shoes. I can't take it from you either. You can sell it to me, exchange it for my table, but I cannot take it away from you for nothing, and you cannot. So that's the idea of property, right? The property is whatever you put your labor into. It's the labor which has this personal value. The so-called labor theory of value. And natural law and human rights, he thought that, of course, there are certain natural, unalienable rights, just like it says in the Constitution. We all have right for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It all goes back to Locke.